Hi, my name is Craig Nelson, and I am one of the pastors at First United Methodist Church of Boca Raton. This is video number 2 or 3, depending on how you look at it. I have an introductory video. I hope you will look at that. But this video is looking at the second option of what your local church might do next as it relates to what's going on with the United Methodist Church and its general conference and the issues around the LGBTQ issue. The title of this is What is Next for My United Methodist Church? And I am preparing these things for our local church. It's just a bunch of awesome people. But what I want to do is to consider what the landing places are depending on which direction you go. And the 3 directions are to remain in the United Methodist Church, to go to a different expression of Methodism, and the third option is to go solo. And I am doing the second one now in thinking about what it means for my church, your church, to join a different Methodist denomination. There are different variations on that tune, right? You can join a progressive new denomination. One is called the Liberation Methodist Connection, the LMX.org, or another one called Grandview Methodist Connection. You can go that way. Or you can go to an existing Methodist expression, a place like the Wesleyan Church or the Free Methodist Church or the AME. And then you could go to a new conservative one on the other end. And I want to kind of contemplate all 3 of those. I want to organize my thoughts around an outline that deals with theology, with polity, with finances, with pastoral appointments, and finally the LGBTQ issue. Actually, finally, I want to lay out some pros and cons the way I see them. The truth is, this is all the way I see it. There's no fact in here. It's just me thinking. And hopefully my thinking here with you will be helpful to your church as we're all trying to figure out what we're going to do. If you go with a different Methodist denomination, you leave the United Methodist Church and you go to another Methodist church, I think your church will always carry with it the tradition, the history, the revival of the Wesleyan movement. None of that goes away. The deep-rootedness that we have in history from the 18th century movement of the Holy Spirit, all of that remains. We remain Arminian. The theology, if you're going to another denomination, doesn't change that much. If you go to an existing Methodist denomination, you're probably going to go to a more conservative one, whether that be the Wesleyan Church, the Free Methodists, the Nazarenes, whatever. You may encounter some resistance to the ordination of women. You may find a preference for adult baptism. You will find more congregationalism in the way that they function. Some of that will change, but generally the doctrine, the creeds will not change if you go from the United Methodist Church to another one. If you go to a new Methodist expression, let's say the Global Methodist Church from the WCA, then very little of the doctrine is going to change. They are very committed to retaining the creeds. They've actually inserted that in their discipline and whatever. And that group, the WCA, has much more elaborately laid out their theology, their doctrine, their practices. They have their own book of discipline at this point. They have their own statements on human sexuality. I mean, they have done a lot of work that way. If you go to a liberationist offshoot, to the more progressive side, you're not going to find that same elaborate working out of theology. One of the reasons for that is that I think those denominations are much more concerned about process. They're more concerned about who's at the table than they are about laying out this, that, or the other. So there are differences depending on which direction you go to these new offshoots from the United Methodist Church. The polity, however, I don't think would change that much. If you go to a different Methodist offshoot, the organization of your local church is probably not going to change that much. And even the larger church may be more abbreviated, may have kind of less components to it, but it will all feel very familiar because they have come out of Methodism. I think you'll find that the appointment of pastors usually will be more consultative, and because of that will require more work on the part of the SPRC, and you know, the SPRC needing to then go look for a new pastor will be much more labor intensive than it is in the United Methodist Church. All of these denominations, new or old, are smaller than the United Methodist Church, and hence the structure, I don't know if I want to say is lighter, you know, or it's smaller, or whatever, but yeah, there's less of it, and so the effect of it is felt differently, just because of the size. And thinking of that, it's interesting. If you go to, say, the Wesleyan Church or any of these, your church may suddenly be the largest Wesleyan church, Nazarene church, whatever, in the area. And that's kind of interesting to think about. You know, kind of you're the new kid on the block, but you may be the larger of the churches in the area. You can Google this and just find that out for yourself. But it's an interesting thought in terms of when you think about joining another group of people. If you are going to go to the Global Methodist Church specifically, to a new expression of Methodism on the conservative side, I think you will find that the structure of that denomination is going to be very similar. They're going to be bishops. Whether they have superintendents, or if they have superintendents, they're going to be called presiding elders. But they're going to look similar. I do think that the vision of the Global Methodist Church is much more oriented towards the local church. And let me just say something. This is something that I learned when I became a district superintendent. I didn't know this when I was serving as a local pastor. The Book of Discipline of the United Methodist Church says that the basic unit of the church is the annual conference. That is paragraph 33, article 2. And that was just kind of surprising to me. But when you think about it, the United Methodist Church isn't a thing. They don't have property. The United Methodist Church itself is not a 501c3. But if you go to the annual conference, it has a pastor. That pastor is called a bishop. It has officers, a whole slew of those. It has employees. It has property. And you can donate to it. You can give to it. You can give. They have their own 501c3. You can donate things to the annual conference. And it has members. I am a member of that church. The basic unit of the United Methodist Church, I'm a member of. The Global Methodist Church is seeking to focus down onto the local church. And I think one of the intents of that is to minimize the expenses of maintaining that basic unit of the church, which is the annual conference. I think the composition of your local church, the officers of your local church, of that local church will remain the same. My church right now, as a United Methodist Church, has a leadership council. It doesn't have a church council. That's an option in the United Methodist Church. It's an option in the Global Methodist Church. And when I think about the Global Methodist Church, none of what I've just said has been ratified. It's their intent, but kind of where that's going to land is yet to be finalized. So just keep that in mind. But let me tell you, you can Google the Global Methodist Church and find out all the things that I have told you and more, a whole lot more. And it's just much more laid out for you to look at. Finances. If you go to another expression of Methodism, regardless of a new one or an existing one, the budget of your church will remain structured the same way. There may be some, apportionment that changes names or it is deleted or whatever, but basically the structure of your budget is going to remain the same, assuming that your membership is going to keep supporting it. That's an unknown for all of us, right? We trust the Lord in that. The unfunded pension liabilities is something that people talk a lot about, and I don't think a lot of people, including those of us who've been involved in it for a while, really know what it means either. My understanding of the unfunded pension liabilities is that the annual conference and Westpath have an obligation to pastors that transcends what a pastor has in their retirement fund. And so there are responsibilities that the annual conference has, and hence Westpath, to retired pastors and to pastors who one day will be, that have been made by the annual conference that will need to be funded and will have to come from somewhere. How the existing United Methodist churches today are paying that is unclear to me. But if you leave, Westpath is very quick to, and rounding up, making it the worst case scenario, give you what that amount is, so that you pay that on the way out. And whether you pay it up front or a lien is put on your property by Westpath so that you were on the hook for that bill, it doesn't matter how that's going to be worked out, and I'm sure Westpath will work with any given church, but it's going to get worked out because it is a bill, and it is going to follow you. And it is going to become an issue that your church has to deal with if you are going to leave the United Methodist Church and go solo or to go with another denomination. Going to, say, the Global Methodist Church or one of the connections, what your apportionments are actually going to be is yet to be determined, but one would assume that they would be substantially less than they are in the United Methodist Church. I have heard people in the Global Methodist Church talk about decreasing your apportionments by 50%. I don't, they haven't figured that out exactly. That hasn't been ratified, but there is a commitment to it being reduced. What about pastoral appointments? I think that regardless of where you go to another expression of Methodism, the appointment will be more consultative and may look, to those of us who have been long involved in the United Methodist Church, will look more like a call system than the current appointment system. We are long used to just receiving pastors, not looking for them. That will be a change. I think that just like in the continuing or post-separation United Methodist Church, you go to a different denomination and the theology of the clergy is going to be more homogeneous, and hence the brand is going to be more identifiable, at least as it relates to the LGBTQ issue. But that has some ramifications. If you're going to look for another pastor, you would expect that the theology of the incoming pastor will be more aligned with the one that you have now. If your pastor is currently conservative, the one that comes will be as well, and would continue that way. But as I said in the previous video, and I want to repeat it here, to laity, if you're a lay person, I just want you to hear from a clergy member that the appointments that are going to be available to us, if we go to another denomination, are going to be less than they are in the United Methodist Church. And professionally, that is a commitment that the clergy person is going to have to make to whatever this movement is. And for women, we in the United Methodist Church are used to, it's not always the preference of every church, but we are used to having female pastors. And that's just not going to be an option for women if you are going to some existing Methodist denominations. The Global Methodist Church will receive women and are seeking to make a priority of making sure that churches interview women when they're looking for pastors. But regardless, I think one of the results of this is going to be longer tenures for pastors. It's going to be harder for a pastor to find another alternative place to go to, and so they will stick around. It will be harder for the local church to go through that process again and find somebody else. There's going to be a reluctance to do that very often, and so tenures will get longer. Finally, on the LGBTQ side of things, if you go to the Global Methodist Church and to most existing Methodist churches today, the definition of marriage is between a man and a woman, and LGBTQ people are precluded from ordination. If, on the other hand, you opt for a more progressive expression, say the Liberation Methodist Connection, the emphasis actually is on the affirmation of LGBTQ people and including them in marriage and ordination, whatever, and expanding that to all marginalized people, and seeking to be more inclusive that way. So, what are the pros and cons in all of this? The pros of joining another Methodist expression. The first thing I want to say in this is to read to you a verse from Scripture, from Ecclesiastes 4:9, that says, "Two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their labor." I have found as a superintendent, as a pastor, that it is really helpful when you're having a disagreement, when you're having a hiccup, when you're having some problem in your local church, to be able to just turn to the book and to see what it says and just settle it that way, or to be able to call an authority and to have long established that person's authority, and so it's accepted. To just be able to consult with a colleague that you know knows about this stuff, there is great value in being connected. And so I guess this first pro that I'm thinking about actually is more in contradistinction to going solo. There's an advantage to being connected, and there's value in that, and that should be considered, deeply considered in all of this. Another pro is, and I've seen this from the larger churches that have gotten more press that are leaving the denomination, they say, listen, we just don't want to be involved in all this. We don't want to be known for this ugliness. We're leaving because we just want to be able to be in mission and do what God has called us to do here. And there is some value in that. I see that, and to be able to leave at least that portion of the malaise, because just because you jump out of one malaise doesn't mean that there isn't malaise on the other side, but there is a freeing of you from that, and that makes sense. related to this, and speaking of malaise, is that the malaise, other malaises of the United Methodist Church continues. And so we may settle the LGBTQ issue in the United Methodist Church, but all the other issues that we have with the denomination are going to continue. So if you leave the United Methodist Church, you're leaving all of that behind as well. Another pro. I think if you go to another denomination, there's a breath of fresh air. There's something new. You just discover a new place. It's like moving into a new house. You're able to live into this new reality. And as I have researched the video series and looked at the stuff that the Global Methodist Church is putting out, it's a lot more positive. It's a lot more exciting. They're looking forward to what's going to happen. You look at the information from the United Methodist Church, and it's just more, we need you to stay, and we need you to just do your thing and keep doing your mission, and we'll be fine. We're going to figure it out. That excitement, I think, has some value to it. Also, if you leave the United Methodist Church and you leave the apportionments the way we have it, when I consider my church and I look at the church across the way here, they don't have apportionments. And so, we don't have that many apportionments. It's $100,000, but that's $100,000 that we could be using in marketing and branding and getting the word out of who we are and what we're doing and being in mission and being involved with youth and whatever else $100,000 might do for you, we don't have because it's going to apportionments. So whatever decrease there is in apportionments is money that the local church can use in mission and to promote the ministry where God has planted you in whatever community you are. I think when I project, I have no idea, but I project going to an annual conference with the Global Methodist Church or with the Liberation Connection, either one of them, and probably any other denomination. Annual conference would be more exciting. It'd be more interesting. It would be a lot of unknowns and growth, and new plans and whatever. And that would be more interesting than for those of us who've gone to annual conferences for a very long time in the United Methodist Church. That sounds interesting. I know it's a little wonkish. I'm sorry. There are on the other hand, some disadvantages, and I want to share some thoughts on that. And I've already shared this, I suppose, but I think it's a negative that the authority of a bishop and a superintendent is diminished. Just in the sense of being able to operate the church in order, to receive pastors and whatever, just having that long established authority in our churches and in our denomination, to lose that is a disadvantage. And whoever that person is, where in the new place that you go, is not going to be acquainted with your church. And so you're just dealing with somebody who is going to be that much farther removed. And they're going to be removed in terms of familiarity, but they're going to be removed geographically. I don't know where the bishop will be for the Global Methodist Church for Florida. It may be up in Georgia. It's going to become more dispersed. And I think that would be true for the Liberation Connection. That would be true for the Wesleyan Church or the Nazarene or whomever. In thinking kind of the same way and thinking about going to a different annual conference, you're the new kid on the block. And so there's a new culture that you have to learn. There's a new pecking order that you have to figure out as well. And my concern is, one of my concerns is that there may be churches who want to join another denomination because it's an easy way out, even now before any version of a protocol is passed before General Conference happens, if you go with another denomination, it's an easy path out, and you're released from the trust clause. Excuse me, a lot of people malign the trust clause, but I don't think they should, because one of the first things that you're going to have to do if you leave is to determine what happens to the church property of your local church if your local church dissolves. If you lose members and you have to dissolve, what's going to happen to your property? And that has to be decided early, because I can see where in some places where a very savvy trustee will say, you know what, if we could just drive everybody away and have a charge conference that would just close this place and we sell it, we'll keep the proceeds. Be awesome. I could see a couple wayward pastors thinking the same way. What happens to the property if your church closes? And what I'm afraid is going to happen is that kind of thinking of release of the trust clause is going to create some unusual bedfellows, that the marriage of your local church with some other denomination is going to be a marriage of convenience, not of love. And if you don't love the one that you're marrying, that marriage isn't going to last very long. So suddenly you've got to change the marquee several times, right? Excuse me, but that is of concern. The whole release of the trust clause is not all positive in my mind and needs to be thought through. Another concern that I have is that if you leave the United Methodist Church, you leave some of the supports that are there when your church is in trouble. For instance, an inspector comes in from the city and looks around and says, your sanctuary doesn't have ANSEL systems. You need to install that. And suddenly that's $30,000, $50,000 you've got to come up with. Your Methodist Foundation, ours is the Florida United Methodist Foundation, has monies available to you to lend to you to make you be able to accomplish that and to be able to keep going. That matters. Lastly, well, let me just say one more thing. The pool of potential pastors is going to be farther away. I'd written that down. I think I've already mentioned this. When you think about having to find a new pastor, they're going to be from Georgia, they're going to be from Maine, they're going to be, whatever. It's just the circle from which you are going to find pastors is going to be larger. I think that this, finally, denominations are decreasing in importance the younger and younger people get. And so to jump from the frying pan into the fire, to go from one denomination to another, is, I don't think, any panacea for alleviating the issues of my local church. I do think that the answer for us is a spiritual one. We have a spiritual problem. It's not a structural one. I don't think it's even a theological one. It's a spiritual problem, and only spiritual answers are going to resolve them. And so I beg you to bathe your thoughts in prayer, to bathe your conversations with prayer. And let us seek together to listen to where God is leading us, so that we're following God, not our own preferences. My prayers are with you. God bless you.